But really what we see day in and day out, the bread and butter of emergency medicine, is people with metabolic diseases, obesity and the musculoskeletal issues that go along with that, and especially issues related to blood sugar physiology, because, 30% of American adults are pre-diabetic, another 12% are actually diabetic. And of course, that leads to all the problems that we see in the emergency departments, from peripheral vascular disease to kidney failure, to true diabetic emergencies, and then the blood vessel issues or the vascular issues associated with high blood sugar lead to, of course, heart attacks and strokes.
This is the Live, Lead, Last podcast.
Welcome to the Live, Lead, Last podcast, where we help you live with intention, lead with integrity, and leave a lasting impact. I'm your host, James Duvall, and I'm so glad you're here today. Before we dive in, I want to remind you again about the Live, Lead, Last 5-day leadership reset. It's a free, practical way to recenter your leadership identity, reignite your purpose, and get re-anchored in what really matters. You'll walk away with clarity, renewed energy, and a plan to lead from a deeper place of alignment. So head over to liveleadlast.com/reset and get started today. Today's conversation is one that matters for every leader, because if you don't manage your energy, your body will eventually manage it for you. We're talking about metabolic health, weight loss, and the overlooked connection between physical resilience and sustained leadership performance. With more than 30% of American adults now classified as pre-diabetic, many without knowing it, this isn't just a personal health issue, it's a leadership one. The decisions you make in your kitchen, your calendar, and your coping patterns impact your influence, your longevity, and your legacy. My guest today is Dr. Paul Kolodzik, a board-certified physician in both preventative and emergency medicine. After decades in the ER treating crisis after crisis, many of them avoidable, he now helps leaders prevent disease before it starts. In his private metabolic health practice, Dr. Kolodzik uses continuous glucose monitoring, CGM, and strategic use of GLP-1 medications to help people lose weight, reverse chronic conditions, and regain control of their health without creating a lifetime dependency on drugs. He's also the author of the Continuous Glucose Monitoring Revolution, where he lays out a clear, data-driven path to better health through lifestyle and smart tech. This is a conversation every leader should hear, because your health is not a side hustle, it's the infrastructure for everything else. So let's get into it. Paul, it's so great to have you on the Live, Lead, Last podcast. Thank you so much for taking some time today to be with us.
It's a pleasure to be here, James.
Yeah, well, just getting to know you a little bit before this conversation. I know we both have some Ohio roots. I won't hold it against you that you don't cheer for Ohio State, but that's okay. I get it. So just so everybody knows where we're coming from, we both grew up in Columbus, Ohio. So James expected me to be a Buckeye, but I went to school in South Bend. And of course, the Buckeyes hammered the Irish. Yeah, that is true.
Earlier this year for the national championship, but we're still, we're coming back. So I'll tell you, I've gone to every Ohio State Notre Dame game over the last 25 years, and we're like 0-6 against the Buckeyes. So
that had to be hard though, like living outside of Columbus and, your team's playing and the place you live is winning. So that's,
yeah, I mean, last year I'm proud of them. I'm just happy where they got. And that's actually, we could do all the podcasts.
I could go football, talk about Freeman and all that stuff. Right. Well, let's talk about you. So you started out in emergency medicine and now are in the metabolic health world. So talk to us a little bit about how you describe your work.
Well, first of all, I'm a career emergency physician. Actually, I'm still working 5 days a week at the Veterans Hospital here in Dayton, just because it's hard to give it up. I enjoy doing it. And of course, if I'm only working a handful of days a month, it's really not that good. If I said a week, I meant a month. So, but it's the metabolic health practice kind of grew out of that experience, seeing people in the emergency department, over the years that are having crises that could have been easily prevented. And what gets all the press in the emergency department is the overdoses and, the multiple traumas and the assaults, but really what we see day in and day out, the bread and butter of emergency medicine is people with metabolic diseases, obesity and the musculoskeletal issues that go along with that, and especially issues related to blood sugar physiology, because, 30% of American adults are pre-diabetic, another 12% are actually diabetic. And of course, that leads to all the problems that we see in the emergency departments, from peripheral vascular disease to kidney failure, to true diabetic emergencies, and then the blood vessel issues or the vascular issues associated with high blood sugar lead to, of course, heart attacks and strokes. So my effort in terms of setting up my own private practice to help people address obesity and metabolic health issues grew out of that experience in the emergency department. And, I've worked with a lot of people now over the course of the last 7-8 years in the metabolic health clinic, and we've been able to reverse a lot of chronic conditions and, have people move down a road so that they can avoid those problems.
That's awesome. Can you take a moment and just, from your perspective, philosophy, define metabolic health, and why does it matter in framing it in today's conversation?
So, the word metabolic health, it can be a little bit confusing. There's a syndrome called metabolic syndrome, which is a combination of being overweight, problems with blood sugar physiology, and then issues with cholesterol, hypertension, and then a variety of other problems go along with that, like fatty liver disease and sleep apnea. And so really, when we focus on metabolic health, it's an effort to reduce the risk associated with those issues. And it really drills down. I don't want to oversimplify, but quite honestly, I think it's helpful at times to simplify things to making sure your blood sugar physiology is in order. And that's why, I think the continuous glucose monitors can be so valuable. I'm going to give you a little bit of historical perspective. Some of this is opinion. I think most of it is fact. But in the 1970s, when we were both back in the Columbus, Ohio area, the food pyramid came out, and we were told overnight to move our diet from a diet that was about 50% fat and 25% carbohydrates, the other 25% being protein. And we were told overnight that cholesterol was public enemy number one, and that we had to decrease our fat intake. So really, in a short span, less than a decade, our diets, we dropped that fat percentage in our diet to 25%, and the carbs took the place of the 50% fat that was there before. So now an American diet is primarily 25% fat, 50% carbs, and then the remainder protein. But I think unmistakably what happened when that happened is the obesity epidemic took off a few years after that. And then the diabetic epidemic took off just after that as well. So I personally believe it's unmistakable that there's a relationship between our increased carb intake and what happened there. I think the cholesterol, for most people, this is not everybody, I believe cholesterol can be an issue. It's not that I'm a non-believer in cholesterol, but from what I've seen, I believe that the majority of people should focus on blood glucose physiology and maybe not cholesterol as much. And there's a natural tension there between the two, because if you go lower carb to keep your blood sugar in order, your diet's going to be higher in fat. That's just
right.
the way it works. And hopefully you're getting adequate protein. And I talk with my patients about good fats and bad fats, but I think, the majority of this metabolic syndrome problem drills down to blood sugar physiology. And that's why I've made education related to that and the management of that a central tenet of my practice.
Yeah, because you can probably educate me on this, but I think sometimes cholesterol gets a really bad name, but it's actually part of our physiology, and it's actually important. So if you tamp it down, or, if you don't have healthy levels of it, right? So it actually works for our health, right?
Right. I mean, only 20% of cholesterol levels are controllable by diet, and 80% is manufactured in your liver, and you really can't do anything about that. again, with 30% of Americans being pre-diabetic, half those people that are pre-diabetic don't know they're pre-diabetic. I see a new patient every week in my practice that doesn't know they're pre-diabetic because we've had this de-emphasis on blood sugar. I think this is just a bigger threat for most people in terms of their long-term health. And, both cholesterol and blood sugar can contribute to vascular issues, which is really the ultimate damage that can be done when blood vessels in your heart and your brain and your liver and your kidneys are affected by inflammation of the arteries. But really, I think it's blood sugar that is the primary insulting event, and then cholesterol comes in and plays a role as well.
Okay. Well, I've been looking for this conversation because if you turn on the TV, there's all sorts of commercials for devices and GLP-1, which we're going to talk a little bit about later. But let's start with continuous glucose monitor technology. So for someone who's completely unfamiliar with CGMs, can you talk a little bit about how they work and the breakthrough for weight loss and metabolic health?
So CGMs are those devices you've probably seen on the back of the arms of diabetics. And they originally were utilized to help people manage insulin. So in other words, what's my blood sugar at the moment? How much insulin do I need to take? But there are great tools to make people aware of what's going on with their blood sugar physiology. And I'm going to digress for a second because I think what's happened in American medicine is this gets de-emphasized. When I got out of my residency, docs were still in their own little practices and, have this relationship with their patients. And now, most physicians are health system employees and their schedule's very regimented. They get 20 minutes or whatever with a patient. They really don't have time at times to address the issues they want with the patients. So I think the can gets kicked down the road at times related to blood glucose physiology. That is that, the doc will say, your blood sugars during your annual visit or semi-annual visit, your blood sugar's a little bit high. We should keep an eye on that. We'll check it next time. When really, in my mind, that's basically what the doc is saying. You're either pre-diabetic or you're close to being pre-diabetic. And that's the time where I think lights and sirens should be going off, because that's the time to intervene. Because if you're pre-diabetic, you can avoid progressing to diabetes, never become diabetic if you do something about it. And that's where CGMs come in. We'll talk about technically how they work, but basically the way I use them is I put them on the back of the arm of patients, any patient, overweight patient, maybe a patient's told their blood sugar is a little bit high, and just tell them to eat a normal diet for a couple weeks. And because you get then graphic readings of where your blood sugar is 24/7, you can see how everything you eat, your activity, your sleep affects what's going on with your blood sugar physiology. And that's an eye opener for some people. So people that come to me primarily for, I want to lose 20 pounds, end up realizing there are much bigger issues that need to be addressed. And the way more than one patient has put it in terms of seeing the graphs and their 24/7 blood sugar readings because of the CGM is, once I've seen it, I can't unsee it. I ruin a lot of people for eating donuts and pizza because, once you have that experience, it's quite honestly hard to go back. I mean, it doesn't mean you're never going to have a piece of pizza or, you aren't going to have a donut or a pizza cake, but you're going to have the knowledge in the back of your mind of really what's going on there. And just briefly about the technology. So the CGMs put a little sensor under the skin. The sensor connects to your smartphone. So for 2 weeks, the sensor lasts 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, you get 24/7 readings of what's going on with your blood sugar. So you can see exactly what is happening, what the issues may or may not be, and then how to address it. And when I first started using CGMs, they required a prescription. Now they're available over the counter for anybody that wants one. They're about $50 for a 2-week CGM. And I think just about anybody would benefit from at least an initial use to see what's going on.
Yeah, that's incredible. When you're talking about pre-diabetic, diabetic, I'm an avid cyclist. I, try to do 70 to 100 miles every week. In pretty good shape, but, when I started getting a little bit older, I thought, I'm going to go see a functional doctor and actually get a full blood panel, which often doesn't happen in, most primary care facilities. And I was pre-diabetic. My blood sugar was high, insulin resistant and so forth. And obviously I could lose some weight, but I wasn't like obese, but really I was kind of a fat, skinny person. So doing some protocols, I didn't do the glucose monitor, but doing some other protocols, starting to exercise and so forth, I was able to see on my, every time I did my blood work, those levels go down to where I was no longer pre-diabetic. So you have to have the knowledge, right? You have to have the know what's going on. And so many people don't. They're just eating what's there and not realizing that they're actually potentially killing themselves in what they're eating, right?
Right. I mean, and that's what a CGM is. It's data. Data is power. So, that's it. People then get the information and they can decide what they want to do with it. I have some people that put on CGMs and they've got relatively flat curves, and they aren't that enthralled with it. But I have a lot of people that see these spikes and drops. So I have people that want to use them intermittently going forward. And I actually have people that never want to be without a CGM on their arm again because they use it to guide their diet and to guide their life. Can I give you a little bit of my perspective of the physiology of what's going on here with the blood sugars and with that historical background of the food pyramid, just briefly?
Yeah.
Okay. So the majority of patients that come to me, most of them want to lose weight. All of them want to be in better health. There, again, is this gentle tension with their diet regarding how many carbohydrates, how much fat, and how much protein. But I think the original issues that have arose related to the food pyramid relates to the fact that, we have eaten higher carb diet over the course of the last 50 years. And now 60% of the food we eat is processed. And when you think processed food, you don't have to get real complicated about it. There are chemicals in there, dyes and stuff that obviously are getting a lot of press these days and are an issue. But a processed food in my mind is basically a refined grain. Okay. And they're refined. That means, it's basically ground flour. They're refined that way because they have a long shelf life. That's the whole reason for refining grains, because, they can sit on the grocery store for months as opposed to, a few days. They have seed oils in them, which are very inflammatory. We were all told to avoid butter, and we went toward margarine. Margarine is the seed oil, corn oil, safflower oil, sunflower oils are inflammatory oils, and then, of course, sugar. And so 60% of the food we eat now is processed food. So a lot of what I like to do is just open people's eyes related to their diet. So the physiology then is, you eat a carb instantly in your system that becomes blood sugar. People don't realize that. I think, with pasta, with potatoes, with bread, it becomes blood sugar. It's not sugar initially that gets absorbed directly, but it is broken down into the gut and absorbed as sugar. When you eat those carbohydrates, your blood sugar rises. The pancreas releases insulin. So far, so good. That's what is supposed to happen. And insulin is the key in the lock to force that blood sugar into your organs. And when I say organs, think about your muscles, okay? So far, so good. Our muscles need energy to contract on those long bike rides. You're going to go ahead and need energy. What happens, though, is that if the blood sugar remains high for a long period of time, as I think it has in a majority of Americans, higher than it would have been otherwise, then those organs end up having all the energy they need. So they've already absorbed a lot of blood glucose. There's a lot of blood glucose in the environment. They have stored energy in the form of a complex blood glucose molecule called glycogen within the organ, the muscle organ itself. And so the organs then start resisting the signal from insulin. So you've heard the term insulin resistance. That's what insulin resistance is. The organs are resisting that signal, basically saying, insulin, we aren't going to listen to you anymore. We got all the energy we need. We don't need to take in this extra blood sugar. And then because if blood sugar would rise too much, it becomes toxic. That extra blood sugar goes to the liver and gets converted to fat and then deposited around the middle. And that's why that's the reason for the majority of American obesity. Some of that fat will stay in the liver, and that's what fatty liver disease is. So, which 1 in 5 Americans has now. So fatty liver disease is a little bit of a misnomer because you think, well, fatty liver disease, that's got to be from me eating too much fat. It's not. It's from for the majority of people. It's from the blood sugar being up for a period of time and that blood sugar getting converted to fat in the liver. So that's the basic physiology. And for most of my patients, I recommend a low carb diet. Again, we watch the fats. We talk about good fats and bad fats, but we lower the carbohydrate intake, and that process reverses. Those organs, those muscles, instead of saying we have too much energy, they start looking around for another source of energy. The blood sugar has been relatively lowered. They aren't used to that. So where are they going to get energy? And of course, it's around the middle. Yeah. It's that fat that we all have, that visceral fat that we all have around the middle that got built up with excess carbohydrates. And now with lower carbohydrates, that fat starts getting broken down and serving as a source of energy. That's when blood sugar gets stabilized and people lose weight. If you do that aggressively with the breakdown of fat, you get ketones. That's where the term keto diet comes from. So kind of in a nutshell, that's kind of the philosophy of the practice in terms of helping people reverse their metabolic syndrome.
Yeah, it's so fascinating going back to even the idea of processed food, because business leaders, entrepreneurs, creators are going so fast paced, a lot of the travel maybe, and it's easy to live on processed food. I was surprised a couple of weeks ago, I was at an event and they were handing out beef sticks, jerky sticks packaged. And, there's some I use like chomps and so forth, which is pretty clean. But this one, I was looking at the ingredients because I've been on this kind of seed oil, like trying to eliminate it from and the thing was made out of 3 or 4 different seed oils, a beef stick. And it's just like, wait a minute, this is not even real food. And I think that's the hard thing, is that because processed food is inexpensive and these seed oils are inexpensive, that you eat so much of it that you don't even know these processed things, that you think you're doing something healthy and it's not, right? Even like some of the plant-based foods and so forth are a lot of seed oils in those. And so it is a difficult thing to keep up. But and I think that's where a lot of like leaders aren't really thinking about their health issues because they're running businesses and so forth. And then
they're busy. Yeah,
they're busy.
I understand all that. Yeah. But to be at the top of your game long term, which is where these people want to be and where they deserve to be, you got to pay attention to these details. A general rule is that the shorter the list of ingredients, the more healthy the food is going to be. Yeah. So even, a steak doesn't have any ingredients in it. A baked potato, even though it's carbs, it doesn't have any broccoli, so the shorter the list of ingredients, the better off you are.
That's great. So I want to ask you, like, how quickly can meaningful health changes happen with the CGM? Like when people start seeing the results of it, like how do you coach people to use the data proactively, not just kind of respond to it? Like once they see the data, it's like, what do they do with it?
Yeah. I mean, people self-correct, quite honestly. Once you see the data, you could have, a doc in their office sitting across the office from you for years saying, move more and eat less, which is the standard, little bit of advice. But people generally self-correct in terms of, I give them an outline. I don't micromanage their diet. We set a carb target, which is often less than 50 grams of carbs a day. We ask them to get adequate protein. We talk about good fats and bad fats, cooking with avocado oil or walnut oil or olive oil and avoiding the seed oils. But people generally that are motivated generally self-correct, and then they can see results within a matter of weeks, really, because what a lot of patients see is this irregularity, this up and down of their blood glucose curves, because the physiology is your blood glucose spikes, insulin gets released, often insulin will overshoot the mark and drive your blood sugar down. So you get these variables, which can lead to fatigue and brain fog as well. There's actually a whole group of physicians now who are looking at the mental health aspects of blood sugar physiology and how if you stabilize the blood sugar, that actually can improve cognition and some other variables. So really people generally self-correct. And I give them some general guidelines in terms of keep your carbs low, keep your protein high. The other 2 legs of the stool of what I work with people on, which also helps reverse insulin resistance, is a little bit of intermittent fasting. Doesn't have to be crazy, 14 or 16 hours overnight, most days of the week. I don't ask people to do, 3-day fasts or even 24-hour fasts. Some choose to do that, and I think that's okay if it's not excessive. And then the third component that we emphasize, because it decreases insulin resistance as well, is strength training.
Mm-hmm.
So, since the 70s, there's been this big emphasis on cardiovascular fitness, and that's great. But I think people doing resistance training, and whether that's weights or bands or some dumbbells, or some people like to do Pilates or even just using your body weight with push-ups and pull-ups, I think strength training is key, because the physiology is because if you can increase your muscle mass, muscles are the most malleable organs that we have. If you can increase that mass a little bit, you increase the quality and the receptivity of those insulin receptors on your muscles, soaks up more insulin, soaks up more blood glucose, and helps stabilize your blood glucose.
Yeah, that was my issue. I talked about going out as kind of skinny fat guy, as I had no lean muscle, because all I did was cardio. I would do hours and hours and hours a week on the bike, and I would still have a gut. I'd still have this tire around the waist. And when I met with my doctor, he's like, yeah, you have no lean muscle. And so that was one of the first things that they did the intervention for me too, was get me to do strength training. And that's been a game changer for me. Like adding 3 days a week, I just go in and do some weights. And, over the last year, I've put on about 8 pounds of muscle. And,
Right.
So my weight hasn't really went down, but I'm leaner, and it's been huge in that process. So yeah, I think I was always reluctant to I don't like lifting weights, but once you start seeing the results of it, more than just being strong, like the health side of it, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think it's really critical. After about age 30, 35, we lose 70% of our muscle per decade. 7% of our muscle per decade. So, you're into your 60s and 70s. That's a lot of muscle mass.
Mm-hmm.
I have my patients, it's just like I do believe in cholesterol. It's just not an emphasis for most of my patients. And actually, as an aside, if I have a patient that has a cholesterol problem, I recognize that I send them to a lipidologist, a lipid expert. We can go down that rabbit hole too, because a lot of people with high cholesterol don't necessarily need to be on a statin, because you can get subfractions of your cholesterol to sort that out. That's probably another topic.
Yeah.
But in terms of cardiovascular fitness, I have my patients follow the American Heart Association guidelines for cardiovascular fitness. Very straightforward. Get your heart rate to 80 to 85% of its max for 75 minutes a week, or 65% of your max for 150 minutes a week. So I like the 75-minute octane. That's what I do myself. And the reason I like that is because it leaves me time for strength training.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to, so the ratio for me ends up being, you working out, 4.5, 5, 6 hours a week. It ends up being a lot more time spent on strength training, but still getting the cardiovascular fitness in to meet the American Heart Association guidelines. And, this is important for everybody, especially important for women, because of the risk of osteoporosis, and the amount of muscle mass you have directly relates to your risk for osteoporosis as you get older. So very critical for women. And I've had some women that have never picked up a weight in their life and then really gotten into it. I had one patient that came in for a visit, and she says, "Hey doc, you know what? I was brushing my hair this morning in the mirror, and I noticed for the first time in my life that I have a bicep."
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. And, this is strength training as you get older is critical. And again, that's why it is one of the primary components of the programs that I recommend for patients.
So I want to talk about another hot topic. Every time I turn on the TV, I'm seeing another commercial from another company on a GLP-1. I'd love to just get a little bit of your thoughts on GLP-1, how you use it for someone hearing about it for the first time. What is it, and how is it used in weight loss?
So GLP-1s are a gastrointestinal hormone, and they have 3 mechanisms of action. One is they slow gastric emptying. That's a fancy way of saying they narrow the valve between the stomach and the intestines So food stays in your stomach for a longer period of time. The second thing they do is help stabilize blood sugar. So we talked about the importance of blood sugar stabilization, leveling out that blood sugar to help, lose weight via the mechanism that we really just discussed. And of course, the primary use of these medications initially was for diabetics. But then the drug companies found that because the GLP-1s don't drop your blood sugar out, they stabilize it, but don't drop it low. And the diabetic patients on the medicines were losing weight. They went back and got approval by the FDA for weight loss. And then the third mechanism is a direct hypothalamic effect, an effect on the brain. And it just provides earlier satiety. You feel full earlier on, so you have a tendency not to eat as much. So with these medicines, the genie is out of the bottle on GLP-1s, and we are not going back. I think you have to consider them effective medicines and good medicines if they aren't abused. And people are going to want more and more people want access to these medicines. There's huge cost issues related to that, as you're probably aware. But I think these will become the most prescribed medicines in the history of the world, supplanting statins, which have that role now. And it's just a matter of time. So the key is using them. Initially I resisted this a little bit, but I don't think there's any resisting it anymore for people that want to use them. So the best approach, I believe, is to use low doses for limited periods of time. I use a technique I call microdosing. So we go to the first couple levels of this medicine, not to the fifth or sixth level. We try and limit the use to a period of months, not years, and have it really complement the lifestyle changes we talked about. The dietary changes, the strength training, and the intermittent fasting. There's this issue of whether these should be medicines for a restart, to get people headed in the right direction. But of course, the pharmaceutical companies would like this to be a treatment for chronic disease where people go on them and they're on them forever. So my practice is conservative in that I don't use them in all my patients, but in those patients that I know they want them and it's appropriate for them, and I don't want them going to somebody else that's not going to provide the kind of guidance I do related to the other issues, then we try to use lower doses for more limited periods of time. Yeah. And then, the muscle mass issue was huge with this, because when you're losing weight on these medications, you aren't only losing fat, you're losing muscle mass. So the strength training even needs to be in the protein intake, needs to be even more emphasized.
So I know that Ozempic's like a big name brand. Is that actually a GLP-1?
Yeah. So here's kind of the scheme of these. So Ozempic has the scientific term semaglutide. You may have heard that term as well. And Ozempic is for diabetics. Exact same medicine for weight loss is Wegovy. Okay. Which you've probably seen the commercials with the people marching down the streets singing, right?
That song from Greatest Showman.
Yeah. And then so that medication is made by Novo Nordisk. And then the analogous medicine made by Eli Lilly is Mounjaro, which is for diabetics. And the weight loss version of that, again, same medicine, different doses, is Zepbound, Zepbound. And then the scientific name for that medicine is tirzepatide.
Okay. So I'm familiar with tirzepatide. And so that's what I was trying to figure out, if there was a difference between that, which I'm familiar with, and other GLP-1s.
Yeah, there's basically on the market right now in the States, there's only two, which is, again, it's Ozempic, Wegovy, which scientific name semaglutide, or Mounjaro for diabetics, Zepbound for weight loss, and tirzepatide. So there's only those two medications, but there's many more coming, including, I think, oral medications.
Yeah. And it is a very expensive medication.
Yeah.
So do you see as that continues to expand that the cost of those things will go down?
Yeah, I think competition is going to do that. The makers of those two medications are already offering discount programs. You probably heard early on that it's, $1,200 a month for these medications. Most of the discount programs from the manufacturer directly, which is the type of medicine that I prescribe now, generally in the $500 range. First few months might be $350 or something like that. it's still very expensive, not obtainable for a lot of people, but not as bad as the $1,200. And then there's been these compounded medications, which are kind of copycat medications, which the FDA has said are not appropriate any longer, except in very specific situations. So there's been that controversy as well.
Right. I don't want to go down a long rabbit trail because I might want to have you back on and have a conversation about this. But I'd love for you just to touch a little bit on alcohol and how GLP-1s, the work, what you're seeing is it's all helping with alcoholism.
This is a very, very interesting topic, and I think pertinent maybe to, the people the people that you were working with operating at a very high level. And it has to do with alcohol intake. So in another former life of mine, I got board certified in addiction medicine. I had an addiction clinic in response kind of the opiate epidemic in Southwest Ohio. But as part of that practice, I treated alcohol patients as well. I started noticing with my patients on GLP-1 in the metabolic practice that they became that their alcohol consumption went down. Most of them were not heavy drinkers, though I did have a handful of heavy drinkers, and their consumption with these medications went way down. So now I'm branching into the arena, understanding these are not FDA approved for alcohol use, but I'm working with some patients specifically on alcohol use reduction. And there's two philosophies related to alcohol. One is abstinence, which I'm all for, 12-step program, Alcoholics Anonymous. That's great for the people that can get there and avoid this roller coaster of abstinence followed by relapse, followed by abstinence, followed by relapse. But most of the patients that come to me with the concern related to alcohol, they quite honestly just want to drink less than they're drinking. And that can be either their overall quantity and their pattern of drinking or the fact that they're binge drinking. And so the technique there is called harm reduction, which is, let's get your number of drinks down, and I classify them as, we categorize this as drinks per week. People are drinking, if they're going home from work and drinking 3 or 4 drinks and then maybe a little bit on the weekend. Maybe they're drinking 30 drinks a week, and our goal is to let's get you to less than 10. And so then I am happy to move people on to abstinence if that's their goals. A lot of people don't want to do that, so I use the GLP-1s now, and then also in the GLP-1s when used are off-label, not approved by the FDA. So we talk about all that. And then there's another medication I've been using for years that helps with alcohol use reduction, which is called naltrexone. And we use that medication as well. And if you use those in combination, people really, without a lot of other work, can decrease their alcohol use very significantly. And, I promote other approaches, individual counseling, journalizing, at least keeping what we call a drink log. Journalizing the amount of drinking you're doing can be very helpful. So there are a variety of behavioral techniques as well. But in terms of medications, I think GLP-1s are going to be the first medication in our armamentarium that's been added to our armamentarium in the last 30 years for alcohol use reduction. And again, not approved yet by the FDA, but I personally believe that that's coming.
That's amazing. I feel like as I've talked to different younger leaders specifically, it feels like there is a move away from alcohol as a social part. I think with the health and wellness movement, I think people are like, don't like the way it makes me feel. But there are people who struggle with that. And so when I started learning about what you're doing, it's like, that's probably an incredible opportunity for people who are trying to move away from that part of their life. I think there's a whole social piece of that has to be addressed too. But I was really intrigued when I started hearing about how GLP-1s were used for that as well. Is that something that you're doing, or do you feel like other functional doctors in the metabolic space are doing that as well?
No, I don't think that many people are doing it yet. Okay. There is a group of clinicians that I'm involved with that have kind of networked related to this. There are a couple major centers. I'll mention Steve Klein in Pennsylvania. He works at the Caron Center, CARON, and he's kind of leading the charge on this. And this is always a risk benefit thing. We didn't talk about the risks associated with GLP-1s, because there are potentially serious risks, pancreatitis, other serious risks. If you keep the doses low, you can avoid, in fact, I've had really no issues with any significant serious side effect. I have people that get nausea and vomiting or abdominal cramping, but if you keep the doses low, you can avoid the majority of that. So I think the philosophy amongst a handful of addictionologists across the country that are using GLP-1s in this manner is basically to keep your doses low, use it with naltrexone, the other FDA approved medication, and then integrate some behavioral technique. Yeah. So, but there's no question in my mind it has an effect on cravings. And I don't know if it's just because of that primary satiety effect in the brain, but the term I hear from people is they just become disinterested in alcohol. I mean, I've had patients, used to drink, 4 or 5 glasses of wine a night, problem in the addiction medicine practice. And again, there's some crossover here with my metabolic health practice. And they say they'll go home and they'll pour a glass of wine, and before it's half gone, they become disinterested in drinking the rest of it. So that, that has huge implications for not only mental health, but metabolic health as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, I have a couple more questions I want to ask you. This is really fascinating. And I really would like to have you come back on because there's a lot of other health things that we kind of touched on with statins and, that space. But so for someone who's listening that maybe can't work with you directly, what would you suggest? And what are maybe 3 or 4 things that you would suggest that they do after listening to this to start moving towards a place of better metabolic health?
Okay. So first of all, I am licensed in Ohio, Indiana, Arizona, and Florida.
Okay.
And I do all my work by telemedicine.
That's good to know.
But I would recommend to people to just start educating yourself. Start listening to the metabolic health physicians that are out there. There's a lot of good information out there on metabolic health. And again, once you start going down these rabbit holes, you're going to feel you're going to find a lot of things. So I have a lot of colleagues doing what I'm doing in different states, but I would just start with the baseline, educate yourself. I'll make a plug for my podcast where we talk about metabolic health and these techniques. Phil Ovadia, Ovadia, out of Florida, is a great doc. He is a cardiothoracic surgeon. So a doc that opens people's chests up and does bypass surgery. And based on his own personal low-carb experience where he lost 120 pounds, he's now an advocate, which is, unusual, and a cardiothoracic surgeon who's an advocate for a low-carb, high-fat diet. Okay. Because he believes so much in the benefits of low-carb and that for him, cholesterol is not the primary problem. But there are all kinds of metabolic health physicians out there, and just begin to educate yourself.
Okay. So I'm going to put the link to your podcast, and I think you've written a book as well on this.
Yeah. So I'll make a plug there. Actually, there's 2 other plugs I got. One is the book. I think it is back there.
Yeah.
It's the Continuous Glucose Monitor Revolution for Non-Diabetics, and it's how diabetics can get an over-the-counter CGM and use it to educate themselves like we talked about. I have a separate non-practice website. My practice website is metabolicmds.com. But for states that I'm not licensed in, I have a site that provides CGM education. And there's also available on that site the opportunity to purchase an over-the-counter CGM. There's a floor rate, the cheapest rate that we're allowed to sell them at. So we do that. And again, they're about $50 for 2 weeks. And I also have a team of health coaches that are not restricted by state licensure issues. And so my health coaches through the CGM-Dr website can provide health coaching to people that put on a CGM and review their patterns with them and provide the kind of guidance I do in my practice without them directly providing medical care.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I was going to ask you if you had a recommendation for a continuous glucose monitor. So I'll go to your website and I'm going to check one out myself. So
yeah, do it. Everybody should. I mean, there's, for at least a couple week period of time using a CGM, it can be eye opening. So the last chapter in the book, as we go through all these different things, how do CGMs work? What are the issues with the food pyramid? What are the best diets, strength training, fasting? The last chapter in the book is CGMs changed lives.
Yeah.
Because I've had people that just see that data and they see the spikes. And again, they're ruined for, processed food to some degree. I don't mean to take that enjoyment away from people. And a lot of times people realize, I tell them, special occasion, you're going to a wedding, you're having a birthday party for your kids. That's great. But in the back of your mind what you need to be doing in general.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, Paul, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been really educational and really enlightening for me. It's actually very affirming of the things that I've been kind of doing for the last year in my own health journey. And it doesn't take a lot of work. It just takes work. I'm always reminded of one of my digital mentors. I never met him. He died a long time ago, but Jim Rohn always said that an ounce of discipline weighs far less than a ton of regret. And, just a little bit of discipline, now is going to pay off huge dividends in the future if you start taking some of these tools that are now available to us, right?
Yeah, and I think if that discipline is founded in knowledge, maybe founded in data, it doesn't become that hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I have patients and they just, there are certain foods, for example, that they just put out of their mind. I mean, they don't even consider it as being, quote, on the table as such. And it's not like they feel deprived.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. A little bit of discipline can prevent a lot of regret, but with data and knowledge, the lifestyle changes can be not that onerous.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for being here.
All right. Thank you for having me, James.
What a valuable conversation with Dr. Paul Kolodzik. His approach bridges science, strategy, and simplicity in a way that makes metabolic health not only approachable, but attractional. For leaders who are wired for impact, this kind of clarity can be a game changer. This episode is a strong reminder the foundation of your leadership isn't just mindset or vision, it's also physical resilience. And that begins with knowing your numbers, adjusting your inputs, and staying proactive about your energy. For those of you who want to go deeper, make sure to check out all the resources that I've linked in the show notes. And if you haven't yet started the Live Lead Last 5-day leadership reset, now's the time. It's free, it's intentional, and it's designed to help you lead from alignment, not exhaustion. So head over to liveleadlast.com/reset to get started today. You can also stay rooted and focused with my weekly email. Just text GROW to 66866 to get signed up. If we haven't connected yet, I'd love to on social media. You can find me on Instagram and LinkedIn at @TheJamesDuvall. Finally, if this episode gave you something to think about or act on, consider rating, reviewing, or sharing it with someone who'd benefit. Every share helps this community of thoughtful, intentional leaders grow. Keep leading with clarity, keep living with purpose, and keep building a life and leadership that lasts.